Hey guys, welcome. I'm Brittany Knutson from R&R by Design, and I'm so excited about this video because I'm going to be showing you a technique for antiquing and distressing these milk paint layers to get that Gustavian finish, something you've never seen before. And where this came from is I actually worked on a pair of outdated oak bedside chests, and they had the beautiful lines just like you would see in an 18th century Swedish Gustavian chest. So I wanted to replicate that, and by studying pictures of actual antiques like you would find in Tara Shaw or another antique boutique, because it's important to learn the distressing marks, the paint patterns, the tones, the layers, all of that to be able to make it look authentic is very important. So if you notice on the chest that I wanted to replicate, there's almost like this white layer of dots, almost like spots, if you will. It's almost like it has a white layer, but then it has another softer white layer, and it's very spotted, almost like the paint had eaten away or worn away over time. The distressing and the edging that you would see. So you see a lot of dirt buildup on corners, or maybe where hardware is, or keyholes, the dirt that kind of builds up around the handles where somebody would have touched it over and over in its lifetime. But there had to be a way to replicate that. And this is actually an old Italian shop who actually replicates these finishes. This is one of their techniques that they use, and I'm so excited. It worked out perfect on my project, and I just thought I had to make a video and share with everybody. So what I'm doing is I'm actually recreating the finish, and I'm going to replicate the exact colors on our inspirational piece and show you step by step, as well as how I antiqued it and how I did the nice beautiful patina and the edging. Everything is going to go rather quick, but I don't go in depth. If you want to learn more about that, I highly suggest watching one of my other videos on my YouTube channel. You can find them on my playlist under milk paint. But this is going to be more focused. You'll see me go fast between the milk paint layers, and then at the end I'll slow down and I'll show you all these new techniques that I'm so excited to share with you. All right, so now that we have all of our layers of milk paint painted on, I'm going to really quickly show you the distressing process, but you've probably seen this on my other videos. My secret weapon to do this and the tools are 4/0 steel wool, and then Amy Howard at Home's antiquing glaze, which if you're familiar with her products, you know exactly what this is, sea sponges, and clean water, and then of course a brush. Now, this is nothing new, but I never explained why I do it in the order that I do. So I start with the steel wool. You see all these kind of little bumps, maybe the puddle up from the milk paint. I use the steel wool to soften that and kind of make it smooth. And I don't like to distress a lot with the steel wool, especially indoors, because it creates a ton of dust. Milk paint is very dusty. So I'll just kind of go over it, smooth out all the bumps, hit the edges, especially where I want those other layers to show through. And a lot of times I'll do circular motions and I'll finish it in the direction of the grain. And you could probably see the dust flying up just from me doing this. And that's it. And then I brush off my surface. See all that nice, lovely dust settling. So the antiquing glaze, what it's going to do is it's going to reactivate the milk paint, which is going to help you remove it and distress it, right, to get through those bottom layers. But it also gives it a color, because the antiquing glaze has kind of an amber, I'll show you here when I pour it out, has like an antique color to it that's going to stain the milk paint. And this is why it's not clear and why it looks like this. So I have my damp sponges. So what I do is I basically just wet the entire surface, right? And this is just to stain it. It also reactivates it for me, but then it has a third purpose. It's going to wet the milk paint so that now when I go back with my steel wool and methodically distress it, it won't create as much dust. Okay, and that's about all I need. So this also helps create the kind of organic shapes too. When I go to distress it, it won't look like I hit it literally with sandpaper or steel wool. It'll kind of break off in chunks. And I'll show you what I mean. So now I go back with my steel wool, right? Again, circular motions. And if you look at antiques, study the pieces and kind of see where it wears naturally and focus it on that area. You don't want it to look forced or fake, like you see a lot of distressed pieces, you know, where it's, you can tell it's not authentic. It looks really forced. Almost like you just took a sander to it. Focusing on the edges. Remember, we have that wood underneath, so we want that to show through. And I'll do this on the edges too, instead of doing this, because it creates these it's not, you know, doesn't look like I just took sandpaper to the edge. You can see right here, see how it goes wide and then it goes back thin. That's what we want, because when something naturally distresses over time, it's not going to look perfect, right? It'll all be kind of, some areas will have more wear than others, just depending on what happened to it, how much it was touched or used or rubbed up against something, or a vacuum cleaner hit it, or whatever the case may be. And usually when I'm doing a large piece, like when I did my chest, you know, I'll focus just on a drawer front, or I'll focus just on the sides, and I will do that entire piece, and I will not move on to the next section of that furniture piece until I have stood back and I've looked at that area and I've decided that I like the way it looks. That way I can keep it in mind when I'm moving forward, right? Because we have to remember our oval eye track, as Amy says. Not only do we want it to look like a real antique, but we also want it to look beautiful, right? So if it's heavy distressed on, you know, maybe one side, it's going to look very unbalanced, and we want it to have a balance to it. As soon as it looks 90% done, this is where you stop and you're ready to move on to the next step. So we want this to dry, which will only take about 20-30 minutes for all the moisture to dry and the milk paint to go back to its dry state, and that's what we want. And then we will move on to the new techniques. Okay, so now that our sample or milk paint is dry, we're ready for the next step, and this is the exciting part. So if you've seen before using antiquing glaze, right, with the sponge, And Amy Howard even shows you how to do something where you put it on your chip brush and then you pull back the bristles. I'll use my Badger brush since it's right here. You know, you dip it in, get off the excess, and then you pull back the bristles like this, and that creates those little flecks, those little water spots that you see on teaks. That's what we're trying to achieve, but on a bigger scale. So I have an easy way to do that. So I added the antiquing glaze to a spray bottle. Just a regular spray bottle, doesn't matter, you know, glass, plastic, whatever. And then I added equal parts antiquing glaze or tea or coffee and equal parts rubbing alcohol. And what that's going to do is rubbing alcohol evaporates very fast. So when I spray the surface with the antiquing glaze, it's going to basically put the color or the stain there, and it's going to stay there and create those water spots. And we're not going to distress those out. We'll soften them a little bit after we spray it, but that's it. I start with the antiquing glaze. And you want to make sure it's spraying nice. We don't want heavy drops. We almost want like a mist. Now, if let's say this was the top of my piece, right? And you can do this, spray it at it, or you can spray it in the air and let it drop. It's up to you. So let's say your piece was small enough that you could turn it on its side and do it this way, then do it this way. So you just spray up in the air and just let the droplets and the staining just fall. Just random until you're happy with it. And remember, if you overdo it, you can always soften it out, just like so. Now let's say we couldn't turn our piece on its side and we were doing it, and when I did the oak chest, I didn't turn it on its side. I sprayed it directly at the sides and the front. Then you would just spray it, get a far enough distance away that it's not going to be heavy, because the farther you are away, the smaller the drops are going to be, right? Obviously, versus if you're up close, it's going to be very saturated. So just scoot back and just kind of, instead of just spraying it at it, just kind of spray, you know, at an angle like this and kind of move it around like this. You see that? Isn't that so amazing? I can't tell you how giddy I was when I did this and it was successful. And then you're going to grab a lint-free rag, and remember, because this has alcohol in it, it's going to dry very, very fast. We just pat the drops, pat the puddles. So now we're going to repeat the same thing we did with the antiquing glaze and the alcohol, and we're going to do it with white milk paint. Now, I pre-made this last time when I worked on the chest, which was not that long ago. I'll just kind of show you. Hopefully you can see it here. Right? So I mixed the milk paint, 1 part milk paint to 2 parts water, so it's watered down. And then I added equal parts alcohol, rubbing alcohol. And what this does is it allows it to evaporate more quickly, right? And it'll create those white almost spots that you see on those Gustavian antiques. And I was so excited when this worked out. And we want it to be, you know, the droplets, the mist. So not quite close, but almost. And you just spray that up in the air. And remember, it's going to dry incredibly fast. Just like I sprayed mine, I sprayed it right at it. And I know this looks dramatic right now. Put this down so you can see it as I dry it, pat it dry. But when we soften it, it'll all come together. And what you're seeing, these dark spots, is the moisture from the milk paint. That will also dry down. But do you see how it leaves almost that ghostly white, right, drop? And the drops are all different sizes. That's what we want. I'm gonna give it a little bit more. Pat that dry. And we're going to let that completely dry, and then I will show you how to soften it. Now that our antiquing glaze and white milk paint that we sprayed is dry, I want you to see this now that it's dried down. See all those little white spots and all the little stained spots, the brown? Isn't that so amazing? Does it not just look just like a Gustavian piece? So exciting. So because like a couple of them do look like little splatter spots like this, we want to soften those. And so we can do this two ways. We can do it with the 400 grit sandpaper or higher, or the steel wool. And we are just softening it and hitting it really fast. You don't want to take off all that beautiful work that and patina that you just added on, just like so. See how when we soften it, it just kind of looks like it's with the rest of it, kind of in the background, just instead of so strong. I mean, that is literally it. That's what I mean by softening it. Fabulous. So now that that is done, the next step is sealing it, which we will do with wax, but I'm also going to show you how to use dark wax to create that almost dirty edging that you see on the Gustavian antiques. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can use dark antique wax, and I know Amy says to always use the light wax first, but in this case we want the dark wax to be heavy like you see on those Gustavian pieces, and you want it to kind of sit under the rest of the wax layers. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So you can use that. You want an old chip brush, or you can use squeezable wax, mine your own beeswax like this, and then you can use powdered pigments to make your own kind of antiquing wax. And so to make that, I use raw umber, which is this dark, cool brown with a dash of black. So you can use either. You can make your own, or you can use the dark wax. And I'll show you with the dark wax to make it easier. So just load up your chip brush, but you're not gonna load up on just the tips. I want you to load it up on the sides too. And I know this is so weird, but you'll see why in a minute, right? So we get it nice and loaded up. And then I get a piece of glass, but you can get a piece of wood, a piece of cardboard, and I'm gonna spray, what's inside of here is clean slate, but you can also use mineral spirits or naphtha. And I just spray a little bit on. Take my brush, and I'm gonna break that dark wax down, almost like I'm making my own paint out of it. Make sure it's where I want it. Spread on the brush. We want it to go up the sides, right? So instead of doing this on the edges, this is what we're gonna do to get those heavy, dirty edges. We're gonna run the side of the brush right here on the edge, and I'll show you how to do that. See that? And sometimes I'll put my finger, let's see, behind the brushes like this, so that, like a duck, they call it the duck hold, right? Like a duck bill. So we can control. See that? Really good on the corner. See that dark? That's what we want. Again, and if it seems like it's running out, we'll just do this on the clean slate, put it in our fingers like this. Now, of course, if this was a piece of furniture, I wouldn't have to constantly move it. I would just go along the edges. Like, let's say it was upright, you know, just go along the edges like this with your finger. Brush it really good on the corners. See that? Just like that. And then you know how sometimes I did it where my keyholes were, just like maybe if the metal had gotten moisture and the rust had dripped down on them and stained the milk paint, right? So where you'll see on the side of Gustavian pieces where it almost has this crack running through, this dark shade. To do that, you use the tips of the brush, not quite the tips, a little bit up, right? You just kind of like this. Of course, pretending this is the side of the piece. You see that? How you do that? Right? So just pretend this is the side. Of course, this is not. This would be like a door. I guess it could be the side, but that's how you would do almost that dark shade that's running down, like so. Say this is the bottom, right? You wanted like a little bit of dirt had settled, right? So you do the duck and just do that. Voila. So you don't actually have to distress it down to the wood. You can create the edging with the dark wax or make your own tinted wax. So same thing, you want to soften this, right? So it's not so stark, and you do that with the sandpaper. Same sandpaper, 400 grit, right? Just a quick. See how that softens that? Doesn't look like it's sitting on top. It looks like it's a part of the layers. Once that's done, now we need to seal it. And what I do to seal it after this is I use clear wax or I'll use light antique wax, just depending on if I want it to have a little bit of warmth to it or if I want it to stay the color that it is. So if you want a little bit of warmth added, add the light antique wax. If you want to keep it more of the color it's at, then add the clear wax.